Africa as a whole is experiencing rapid growth, but it's important to recognize the singularity of each country and the variation in business environments by region and by industry. So our discussion today will provide an overview of the tech industry, including the current state of infrastructures and resources, the startup and venture capital scene, and the role technology plays in making a lasting impact in people's lives. Our speakers will also share their thoughts on how they see these different elements evolve as we move into the future. The panel today will be moderated by UCLA professor Terry Kramer, who teaches courses on technology management and evolution and innovation in the global mobile industry. Professor Kramer has held executive roles in AirTouch, Pactel, and Vodafone globally, and was appointed by President Obama to serve as ambassador, head of US delegation for the World Conference on International Telecommunications in June 2012. The speakers will introduce themselves in just a few moments, but please join me in welcoming Professor Kramer and our three panelists.
Good. So first of all, thanks. And it's great to see a bunch of familiar faces. And I was mentioning to somebody when they were just arriving, this topic to me is the intersection of two very hot, timely, growing issues, Africa and technology. And hopefully we'll get through a lot of the interesting opportunities that are here. Let me ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves. Don, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. My name is Don Opara, Anderson alum, 2006. Currently run a company called Venture Aviator, which is a software development firm. Grew up in Nigeria and spent my secondary school or high school days in Nigeria.
Excellent. Good. Ami?
Great. Hi, I'm Ami Gasalia. I think I'm the only non-Bruin probably in the room. I am the head of growth and part of the founding team at Tala. I guess we'll talk more about companies later. Right?
Yep, absolutely.
So before Tala, I worked in consulting and microfinance around Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Yeah.
Great.
Guy Kamgang. I'm a 97 Anderson grad, so 20 years. We just celebrated our 20-year reunion. I'm originally from Cameroon. I spent about six months out of the year in Africa. So I live between here and Africa and Europe, and I'm in mobile. Before that, I worked for PwC after business school. I did the usual consulting, 3 to 5 years, but for 17 years I've been doing business in Africa.
Excellent, great. So what we're going to do is about 25 minutes of some Q&A with the speakers here, and then we'll open it up broadly to any questions that you have, so be thinking about what your questions are. You know, number one, I always like to start out with a bit of context setting, just so we all have kind of the same understanding. Context about Africa, some of the differences within the continent in terms of countries, where technology stands, et cetera. Can you give us just a little bit of background on how you see Africa and context there? Ami?
Sure. So, you know, when I think about how technology has changed in Africa, just briefly the work we're doing, I don't think I got a chance to cover, but we're using mobile phone data to create credit scores and financial identities for people throughout emerging markets, but mostly so far in Africa. And the only reason that's possible is because of all these macro level changes that have happened over the last 10 to 20 years. And the fact that there's like over 300 million people with smartphones throughout the continent, the fact that internet penetration is getting there, the speeds have a way to come, but the fact that that even exists, the fact that you can go into the middle of a rural area and someone has Facebook and that we can verify their identity, I think all those things are possible because of all the changes in technology that have happened over the last decade or so.
Good. So first of all, high mobile penetration, pretty good internet access. In terms of some of the areas of technology, e-commerce, AI, some of those, any thoughts on those?
Yeah, I mean, e-commerce is beginning to rise in Africa. I think it had some challenges, you know, beyond just the access to the internet, but as that became more popular, there were also issues around fulfillment, you know. But some companies, some innovators are starting to work around that. I think for me, one of the big changes is also, there's this concept of technology leapfrogging, where, you know, people who never had a landline end up with a phone or even a smartphone. So that has happened a lot in Africa, and that's been a big factor. But also the access to information means that a lot of the young people have the mindset that they can be entrepreneurs, they can be tech entrepreneurs, And they didn't necessarily have to go through, the last 50 years that maybe other parts of the world went through. They could just jump straight to that level of thinking because of the access to information. So I think that's having a big role in terms of the outlook for Africa.
Excellent, excellent. One other contextual question. Just tell us a little bit about the differences in some of the countries and regions within Africa, just so we don't have an unnecessarily homogenous look at Africa. Guy, you want to?
Yeah, that's a good point, because to me, Africa is really 5 continents, and nothing is, each region, from North Africa is one way, West Africa, and when you look at all these different regions, you always have to understand the historical context. For example, West Africa was predominantly colonized by the French, so that sets a whole set of problems. Versus East Africa was, Southern Africa went through, a lot of also tribulation. So because the continent is not uniform, each region has to be dealt with in a different way. We have offices in all 5 regions, so the sets of challenges we face are totally different from one region to another. Even the level of development, the impact of technology, the level of literacy, all these things need to be factored in to kind of have a view of the market.
Good, good. Let's now kind of talk more specifically about where you see the most promising areas of innovation and technology. And maybe what we can do here is have each of you cover this and tell us just a little bit more about your area of domain expertise, what you've been spending time on, and then in turn, what are the top 2 or 3 things you see as technology-based opportunities? Don, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a ton of opportunities because technology affects every single industry. I think the only difference maybe to some extent with Africa is you have to keep in mind some of the infrastructural challenges. So in some sense, the level of technology you might need over here, you might not always need it over there. You could work with a simpler version of the technology and do very well. So you don't have to kind of overthink it. I think ag tech is a huge area. Globally, that's a rising area, agricultural-based technology. And of course, Africa has a lot of agriculture, so that's an obvious one. I think on the data side, I work in IT, so data is a huge area right now globally, AI, machine learning, all of this. I think the thing with Africa, and maybe the opportunity there, is to actually get the data. And that may be from digitizing a lot of old, non-digital data that's out there, to smart ways to kind of get new data in. Once you have the data, I think it's increasingly well understood what you can do with it, all the exciting opportunities around data. So those are a few of the things I see.
Good, and when you say ag tech, you're like talking about the Internet of Things, sensors, understanding irrigation,
yeah,
and what to do?
all of that. So we work with a lot of growth stage companies, not so much in Africa, but some of them are targeting Africa. So we have a client that's doing some work around allowing farmers to sort of validate the potential of their farms and then feed that into essentially credit ratings for loans. So they can sort of justify that, my farm has this potential and therefore I deserve this level of loan and that sort of thing. So that's just one example, but things like that.
Excellent. Good. Ami?
Yeah, I think echoing some of what Don said, I think that data is really the key, and because people have smartphones, because there's internet, there's all this data that has never existed before on people. So there's opportunities to validate, to create financial identities, to create identities at all, right? In a lot of the markets that we've looked at in Africa, there's no national ID system. So even just the ability for someone to verify who they are, it can be really difficult. As we talked about e-commerce briefly, one of the biggest challenges with e-commerce has been that people don't have real addresses. It's like my address is 3 feet down from the gas station. And so there are companies that I've seen. There's a company called OKHi that's actually trying to create a new address system for some of the markets. And then I think the other opportunities are in healthcare, are in education, where there's an ability to distribute information in a way that hasn't been distributed before to people, whether it's in remote areas or even just in like more underserved areas. I think there's a cool company I saw recently called Flare, and what they're doing is aggregating the information on ambulances, because there's no like centralized dispatch system, so that whoever the closest ambulance is can actually reach someone. I think there are opportunities like that just because, again, because of the lack of infrastructure to create new ways of solving problems.
Yep. And are there any common themes? I mean, as you're talking about this, are these kind of infrastructure-based things? You're trying to create a common capability and knowledge, and then the end applications come later? Is that kind of how you think about the opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there has to be a system that is designed for people rather than taking a solution that works somewhere else and kind of copying and pasting it. And so rather than trying to create all of the infrastructure, I think, like Don said, I really believe in the concept of creative constraints, and that having those constraints forces you to come up with solutions in a way that, that work for the market.
Excellent. Good. Guy?
I like the, in terms of innovation, you know, that could apply worldwide. Mobile banking and, you know, the East Africa, M-Pesa, whatever they're doing in terms of mobile banking, micro-billing and things like that, has huge, you know, potential from a global basis. But my take on technology in Africa is a bit different, because a lot of stories we hear about technology in Africa are really more like experiments, you know, project-based. Oh, you know, this guy doesn't do it, technology could help. But the reality is, we're not creating that technology, right? So, I mean, as far as Africans, some guy in the UK is sitting and say, hey, you know, this farmer could use this, but the farmer doesn't know what it is. So therefore, you have a guy in the UK or in the US or somewhere who's going to say, hey, Mr. Farmer, why don't you use my technology? The problem is the guy probably can't pay for it, or is not, you know, educated or smart enough to understand it. So therefore, you have this guy in the UK who has like investors and board members telling him, you have to do a return on your investment. And he's like, well, the opportunity is in Africa, but there's no way to monetize it. So as a result, you have a lot of NGOs who are coming with these ideas. But the reality is, you know, I mean, I'm a believer in technology in Africa because that's how I'm making my money. But there's still a disconnect between applications that need to be developed by the market, for the market, as opposed to solutions who are manufactured outside of Africa to try to fit a market that sometimes is very expensive and people can't really pay for it. And since there's no venture capital environment, then they oftentimes remain big ideas and big projects you put on the PowerPoint to raise money. But then the minute you raise the money, you don't really, you know, apply it. So are you a bigger believer that it's better to take technology from somewhere else that maybe has already been developed and then find a unique way to kind of customize it, distribute it locally? Or the opposite, it needs to come up organically within Africa and forget the UK and other places developing technology, or the US? Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because I believe it needs to be homegrown. But then you don't have the developers, you don't have the people to actually do it. So right now we're working on, even, you know, the technology we develop, we have to customize them. Now we can do it efficiently because we understand exactly how it should work. So to some extent we could argue that it's homegrown, but it's, you know, developed with foreign investments. So ideally, yes, it'll be great if there was a network of developers who could create the technologies that are fit for the marketplace. But in the meantime, we've got to work with what we have.
Yep. Some of my students that are in the class are going to groan when I ask this question, but one of the things we talk about is just not where's the opportunity, but who's going to win. So there's a lot of discussion, obviously, in the US right now, and you see a lot of kind of antitrust view that says there's a few large technology companies, whether it be IBM, Amazon, Google, Apple, that disproportionately are taking more and more opportunities, and the more big data oriented it is, we need lots of data, the more they're kind of moving through vertical. Do you get worried about that and say this is kind of the way it's going to happen here as well, or it's going to actually, the needs are so different that it's not applicable?
I think that speaks a lot to, it's Guy, am I saying right? To what Guy said, is that while a company can come in and say, like, we know big data, we can solve the problem, I don't think that a company like IBM, or even a local large company for that matter, has the concentrated resources to really understand the actual problem, right? And I think I have a little bit of a different view on the previous question related to that, but I think that seeing the resources that are available globally can actually be an asset to developing a solution that is local, that is developed with people, not for people. And I think that there is talent starting to develop in a lot of the markets we work in. We actually have an entire engineering team in Kenya because we found that we had great talent and people could build a product that they actually did understand the use case from the market of. So coming back to the IBM, I think that the bigger companies could be more of collaborators in driving solutions, but I don't think they will channel enough resources into actually understanding the small problems. Even like a company like Uber, we've spoken with Uber in Kenya, and it took them years to think about making a solution that was focused on a market like Kenya that has mobile money, to create a mobile money payment solution for Kenya, because they have a lot of other fish to fry, right? They have much bigger sources of opportunity and revenue.
Yep.
So I think it's important to see those companies as a collaborator rather than a competitor.
Yep. Okay, so there's a bunch of local opportunities. Some of them are infrastructure oriented, some of them are end application oriented. If you were to kind of advise everybody here, let's assume everybody here wants to kind of do something in Africa, something entrepreneurial, et cetera. What are the things they need to think about? You know, you look at kind of regulation, you look at culture, those things. What would be the things you would advise them on? Don, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that question. I think it's a combination of what your passions are, what your interests are, what your competencies are, and then you look at where you're trying to target, and you figure out what's best for you. So if you happen to have like some deep, relationships with government or some big organizations and so on, that may open up certain types of opportunity for you. If you don't, then you may have to go for a different kind of opportunity. So if you're just going there as an entrepreneur and you don't really know how to navigate a lot of the government issues or the infrastructure, you might want like more of a just direct to consumer type of model, where you're doing like through mobile, you're delivering some financial service, or you're delivering like telehealth, or just something where basically you can say, look, I deliver this, the person pays for it, and that's it. I don't have to have any government support or have any big partnerships. So I think those are some of the things to consider. I think some local partners is always good because there's a lot of cultural issues that you should educate yourself over time, but you can't educate yourself, just overnight. So it's good to have local partners. It's also a challenge to find the right local partner, because if you find the wrong one, you have a different set of problems. So, it's a lot of things to think about. Just to add a couple of points to some of the things we were talking about earlier, which is, we also have to remember that there's a growing middle class in many African countries now. So, whereas there's certain opportunities where you might be targeting somebody in a rural area with some kind of service, you also have people in the cities who maybe used to live in LA, New York, London, who expect, pizza delivery on demand or Uber or whatever it is. So there's opportunities like that, where, everything about technology in the West, you can apply and adapt, but it's relevant. And then there's other opportunities where you have to really kind of approach in a different way. And, it's not going to be high tech. It's going to be some medium level tech that's adapted and, to the opportunity that you're facing. So,
And bring, whether it's you or the others, bring some of the government stuff to life. What do you need to actually do with the government? Are you trying to get money to help fund things? Are you just trying to build a relationship so they know who you are? Are there approvals that need to happen? Give us a couple of examples that bring it all to life.
The least you have to deal with the government, the better. Okay. That's the best advice. The opportunities, and once again, Africa is 5 regions, right? So, this sounds like a blanket statement, but most of the governments today are still not as forward thinking as they should be, or as we would expect them to be, right? So, all the opportunities I've seen that are significant for most of us, right? People, if you want to go to Africa, you want to go to Africa to make a killing, not to retire, right? So the opportunities are more with in the private sector, not with the government, because the government today, once again, as I talked about, you have to understand the history. The question about what you need to know about Africa, you need first to identify which are the 5 regions you want to be in, right? South Africa is completely different from Ethiopia. But then understand the history, because understanding the history, the colonial powers, the way the laws are, British law versus French law, even before you think about going into a business. Then you'll understand how much the government can help, or how much the government can actually be your enemy in terms of just getting things done. So I would say my advice is stay away from any type of government deals. You'll hear people telling you, oh, there's this tender in Nigeria, it's 100 million, let's get involved. Don't do it.
Okay.
It's already rigged in the beginning, so.
Okay.
That's been my, once again, maybe East Africa is different. I mean,
think it
Kenya.
can be. I think it can be. Well, in terms of what the advice I would say is to have a lot of patience and persistence, and you can't get frustrated easily because that doesn't work well. But I mean, I think that East Africa is different, and it's not fair to generalize. Even amidst East Africa, we've had very different experiences in Kenya versus Tanzania, for example. But I also think there is an openness and like an entrepreneurial spirit to some governments, or to at least some people within government. So I think part of it is finding the right people that can actually be your champions. And when you have a lot of what we did when we started was we worked kind of under the radar. We built a consumer base that really loved our product. And then when we went to the government, we had a story to tell, and we had people behind it. And so that doesn't always work, but I think that if you find the right partners, and I don't mean like partnerships, I mean the right even like people within government, then that actually can help you get things done.
So I saw a talk some years back from an economist about Africa. He was talking about the difference between perceived risk and actual risk. I said in between there lies a huge opportunity. So with Africa, you probably might have heard some story about a certain country that's in your mind from 10 years ago, 15 years ago. What happened in Rwanda, or what happened in South Africa, or this or that. And then if you actually go and research what's happening today, it could be completely different. Like Rwanda today is actually one of the most tech-forward countries in Africa. The government is very supportive of a lot of initiatives. But you might think of Rwanda, in a completely different context, and not even consider it. You just cross it off. So if you actually go and study what's going on country by country, you may find that one country that was having a civil war 10 years ago is now actually your best bet. Whereas the one that was like looking promising 10 years ago is now not so good because things have changed in some way. So being up to date, country by country, I think is very important.
Yeah, and on that topic, Don, what countries are you most excited about in Africa? When you look at where they are economically, politically, where consumer demand is, where technology availability is, which countries are you most excited about?
Well, being from Nigeria, I have to be biased and say that despite all these issues, I still think it's a huge opportunity in so many ways. It's going slowly in certain ways, but the opportunity is so big. I think Ghana is always good. Ghana is sort of being seen as a gateway into Africa now because it's a little more sane than Nigeria in the West African context. So people are piloting things in Ghana with a view to then kind of jumping into Nigeria and some of the other countries. I think Egypt has a lot of promise. My brother is actually doing a lot of work out there right now. But, again, there's a right stability. So a lot of countries is difficult because on one hand, they have a lot of promise. The other hand, they have some, other factors going on that may potentially cause instability. And you don't know how it's all going to play out. If it plays out one way, it could be a huge opportunity. If it plays out another way, So you just have to kind of watch it.
Good. Guy, what's your view on that?
I would probably say Nigeria. So let's just, say we take away all the civil war, the risk, the political risk. I would say probably Nigeria, Ghana. I mean, East Africa, Kenya. Kenya is always a good bet. On the Francophone side, the only one I see that has significant promise is Côte d'Ivoire. That's the one place. And we've been there for 3.5 years, so it's a really good market. And in Southern Africa, pockets of opportunities, even Mozambique, is a good place. So there are opportunities everywhere, to be honest.
Good. Ami, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think a lot of my answers would be the same. Like Nigeria is 200 million people, so it's a massive opportunity. And there are definitely challenges, but Lagos is a big tech hub, as well as Nairobi. They're all the Silicon Savannah kind of. And I think that the difference is that there's an openness to try technology and things that can then that you can then like actually take to some of the other markets that have similarities in the region. I also think Tanzania is a really big opportunity, particularly because while mobile money is prevalent there, it hasn't reached the level of success in Kenya, but I think it could. And all of the innovation that we've seen in Kenya because of mobile money has yet to happen in Tanzania, and it's a big market.
Makes sense. Good. Let me ask one last kind of, I would call it a horizontal question, then we'll get into some specifics, and that's on culture. Because all of you have kind of alluded to cultural differences, and you can have the best idea, the best technology, et cetera. You try and do business in another country, it just falls flat. And I've had my own experience, living in Europe, et cetera. Even Europe, US has got notable cultural differences. What are the differences you see? If you were to advise people that are from the US that want to do business in Africa, what are those cultural differences you'd say be aware of?
I think one thing is just that generally, for the most part, at least I've spent a good amount of time throughout the different countries, is having a lot of distrust in like government, distrust in institutions, and so people will actually like not put their money in the bank and they'll put it in their house somewhere because they don't really believe it's going to be there, and they've had reason to have that's happened to them before. So I think that kind of distrust. But then on the other hand, I think that there is this kind of openness and willingness to try technology. The first internet experience that most people have had has been on their phone, right? They, like similar to like skipping the generation of skipping the gap is if my phone is my first experience with the internet, then I don't have some of the sensitivity to some of the challenges around technology that maybe we've experienced in the West more.
Good, good. Others?
So there's a kind of a big difference between the Francophone and Anglophone and some sort of, the Portuguese also were colonized Africa. So on the Francophone side, for example, they're a bit, they're still under the influence of the colonial past. So they look up to France a lot. So you see a lot of similarities that you will see from French people there versus the Anglophone, for example, are more entrepreneurial. They're more, they understand capitalism. Francophone don't understand capitalism. So you don't often speak the same language when you want to talk business. But I think, as you said, there's probably an openness to trying new things. And Africans are naturally curious. So that's they're open to different people, different cultures, and to trying new things.
Good, makes sense. Let's talk, go ahead.
Just a couple of quick points. I mean, I think that you can't generalize, but I think unfortunately, there's oftentimes like a short-term versus long-term thinking. And part of that is because, as you alluded to, is the lack of faith in certain infrastructure and institutions. So whereas somebody here might be saying, yeah, sure, I'm going to go into this long-term deal. It's going to be a 10-year deal. And at the end of 10 years, I'm going to get this return on that and that. Somebody in Africa might be looking at it from, what can I get in 6 months or 12 months and get out? Because I don't know where the country is going to be in 10 years, let alone this deal, So that's one thing to keep in mind. It's designing incentive structures is very important so that you can get people to have more of a long-term, thinking in what they're doing. Or if they're not going to have it, you can factor it into your model. I think another one which people don't really, think about that much is just on the spiritual side. It's a very spiritual continent. People have a lot of there's a lot of people that have belief in God of one kind of denomination or another. And that influences a lot of the way that people think, which, for the West, not saying that people don't believe in God, but it's not so, there it's very ingrained in every aspect of a lot of people's lives. So that's going to influence a lot of how they think about things. And even from a distribution perspective, like, for example, the church infrastructure, that's one of the biggest distribution mechanisms available because millions of people are going to church every Sunday, and that's a huge part of their lives. And if you partner with the church to distribute what you want to distribute and the pastor endorses it, that could be your fastest distribution mechanism. You would never think of that in LA as your distribution mechanism. So something like that as well is something to keep in mind.
Makes sense. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about each of your areas of domain expertise. And Ami, maybe I'll start with you. You've got a kind of a clever way of using credit scoring for kind of financial enablement. Tell us a little more about it. I think you've done this in Kenya. Can you kind of expand it elsewhere in Africa, or is it specific there?
Yeah, sure. So the way it works is that anyone with a smartphone in the markets that we're in can download our app and instantly we can evaluate their creditworthiness and their capacity for debt just using the data on their device. So everything from their mobile money transactions to their social network to their location data, we can validate someone's identity and then understand whether they should qualify for debt, how much, at what terms. And we actually give that decision to them instantly, and the loan is set instantly. So if you think about traditionally, someone who would have to go to a bank, apply for a loan, so we take this entire process that could take months and turn it into 2 minutes where you are. I think it's worked very well in Kenya because a lot of the things we've talked about, the openness technology, the infrastructure being there. We're now in Tanzania, and we actually just launched in the Philippines as well, and we're looking at some other markets in Africa. And it's definitely about localizing a solution, right? The general kind of framework of using alternative data to understand someone, I think does translate across markets. The way you do it, the way you communicate it, the way that even that we've grown, right? And so in Kenya, we've had a lot of word of mouth growth, right? And so because there is more of this spiritual culture, there's more of a community aspect to things, that we found that the best way for us to build trust was just to have our own customers create incentives for our own customers to tell their networks about the product. I think the challenges will be different in different markets. The regulation will be different. East Africa is well known for being much more, having much more of like the global scene on it. Obama has visited Kenya and all those kinds of things. So I do think it can translate well, but it's not, you can't take this copy and paste approach. You have to really understand your customers in the market in every place you go. And you can't talk about Africa as a whole.
Good, helpful. And Guy, you've got an interesting solution that allows people that don't have smartphones or high-speed networks to, in essence, access the internet. Tell us a little bit about that, and then obviously as smartphone penetration rises, which it is dramatically in a lot of African nations, what happens next?
Yeah, so we started off with a browser. It's basically a software that turns a basic phone into a smartphone. We did very well with that, and we're now distributing content in various regions, and text-based content, right? So as long as there be poor people and high literacy rate, text-based or SMS will be huge. But we've pivoted the business about a bit of a year ago, and now instead of text-based content, we're delivering video content. So we've created a video sharing platform, very similar to Snapchat, but with a monetization process through carrier billing. So it sounds complicated, but basically you subscribe to the service to get videos from your local celebrities. It was basically an idea to empower local celebrities to make money from their content, because if you're on Snapchat, you may have 1 million followers, Snapchat doesn't pay you anything. So what we did is we took the idea of Snapchat, and as a consumer, I will subscribe to Snapchat and through your carrier, and we will take some of the payments and give it back to the celebrity locally. So we've launched, 2 weeks ago, we have over 20,000 subscribers in 2 weeks in one market. And so we have a roadmap to be in 7 markets this year. So it's really a way to help local influencers make money, because the same guy we're going to give $300 or $400 next month, he would have killed himself at weddings and funerals and singing, and he wouldn't even make that kind of money.
Yeah, what type of content's most popular?
Jokes.
Okay.
So we've signed a lot of comedians. We signed some major Che Guevara. We signed some major singers. We've signed some international celebrities, soccer players. So, but the most and some like Kim Kardashian type.
Okay.
So yeah, but it's good because now local influencers can make money from their fans, which they couldn't do before.
Don, what about you? You've done a whole bunch of stuff in venture incubators and other things. What are you seeing there? What are people in country interested in most, and entrepreneurs here as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done the majority of our work actually in the U.S. with U.S. startups and venture-backed companies, things of that nature. I think to Guy's point earlier, I mean, for us, the price point has been such that much as I would love to be working with African clients, a lot of times it just doesn't make sense in terms of what it would take for us to build, let's say, mobile products, and then what it would take the entrepreneur in Africa to recoup the cost and start becoming profitable. But one of the things that I actually think there's potential is kind of technology transfer. So although you cannot just take technology from here and just put it into Africa automatically, you have to customize, localize, all of those things. I think that if you look at a typical like Silicon Valley-based tech startup, they have a rollout map that looks like maybe US, and then maybe from there they're going to English speaking, maybe like Canada, UK, then maybe they're going to, maybe they probably have a China strategy, blah, blah, blah. But they probably don't hit the first African country, if there's even an African country on the roadmap, until country number like 15 or 20 or something like that. So I've always thought that there's an interesting opportunity to partner with these companies and say, listen, we've done the analysis and we know that you have a great technology for, let's just call it like pizza delivery or something like that. And we know there's a demand for that in certain segment in Lagos. Let's basically partner with you, license that, adapt it locally, and run that business for you. And it's additional revenue that you did not anticipate. I think that's an opportunity that's there, but it's open. I don't think anyone has really nailed that yet.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm interested in.
Yeah, if we can ask you, what are your top clients? What type of businesses are they, and what are they trying to do?
It's quite a wide range of clients. Recently, we've done some what they call real estate tech. So platforms that allow you to buy and sell real estate online. We did shipping and logistics. We did a competitor to Slack that was acquired by a NASDAQ company recently. And to the Kim Kardashian point, we did a company called the Star Sightings, which is crowdsourced celebrity news. So anytime you see your favorite celebrity, you can take a picture and upload that as a news story to the app.
It's like a paparazzi
kind of like
tech.
crowd-based paparazzi.
Yeah,
So the celebrities have nowhere to hide.
Okay. Excellent. Good. Well, let me open it up to questions that you guys have. There's one right in the back.
Thanks for the insights. Just wondering, where do you see a lot of investment money coming in from? Is it from U.S. markets or from China or from within Africa?
I think that, like, from the companies that we've seen working in the markets, we've seen a lot of U.S.-based investments for the bigger companies. I think that's one of the biggest gaps, and definitely that we've seen, is the ability to get real funding, like real funding to actually scale. I do think there are some new opportunities. There's some accelerators, things like that are opening up in Nairobi. I know the most about Kenya, I'd say, but I think there is an opportunity to create like co-investments between. And there are some companies that are starting to have funds specifically for Africa, some of the VCs. I think that's probably it's a newer market, but I think that's a good place to start.
I think it depends. It depends on the type of investment. So infrastructure, China is putting this, everybody knows, putting a ton of money to Africa. A lot of private equity firms are already in Africa, but they might be doing things like building call centers, or again, it's kind of infrastructure type of things. There's not really so much of your typical venture capital. That's one of the problems for people who want to be tech entrepreneurs in that level. But they're in there. I mean, Techstars is there. A lot of these people, are already in there, but just the volume is nowhere compared to what it is out here. But I'll just add this point. I think that there's two things that are going on in parallel, which some people don't realize. That on the one hand, you have, of course, there's a lot of challenges in Africa. Have a lot of business models around social impact, how to hit the bottom of the pyramid, all of those things. That's going on. In parallel, there's the rising middle class, and there's the democratization of information and all of that going on as well. So there are a lot of people, entrepreneurs and customers and investors alike, who just look at Africa as any other market right now already. They're not looking at Africa as, oh, this is the bottom of the pyramid. They're looking at Africa as, this is where I can make alpha on my investment. And the same way they would look at Vietnam or Brazil or anywhere else. So in that sense, that is going on as well. So a lot of the savvy investors, if they see a good opportunity in Africa, they do their normal due diligence, they put their money in. So I think that's what's going on, in parallel with the other kind of things that are going on the...
Yep. And just to tag onto this question a bit, are the investors you're seeing, venture firms, private equity firms, are they specializing in Africa? Or these are all the top names we would hear, and they just have somebody that happens to look at it?
Well, from my experience, one of my really good friends has been named partner at Partech. It's a big Silicon area VC who opened an office in Paris, and he was tasked to look at investments into Africa. So it could be a significant fund looking to invest and opportunities just strictly in Africa.
In Africa. Good.
I think there's more curiosity than actual investment right now, but
Yeah.
I think it's starting.
There are some specialist firms, again, more on the PE side, private equity
Yeah,
side.
yeah.
One of the problems in Africa historically with investment has been exits and liquidity. Because how do you invest in a company, you grow it, but then who is going to acquire it, or where's the liquidity, or is the stock market established? That's one of the things. But on the private equity side, there are companies that will go in and acquire established firms with proven
Yeah.
track record and have a roll-up strategy and things of that nature, as opposed to the, let's start something from scratch like you have in
Yeah.
Silicon Valley.
So that's a worry a bit. I mean, if you want like new technology and stuff, generally it's a venture firm, not a private equity firm. And so you're saying that may take a little bit longer.
I mean, as I said, I think it's a matter of just looking at the opportunity. I mean, there might be a huge opportunity to take very simple technology and make millions out of it because you're fulfilling a customer demand. But that technology might not be so innovative. It might not be something that will be funded by, Kleiner Perkins in Silicon Valley, but it's going to make more money than the Kleiner funded company in Silicon Valley. So it's just a matter of thinking about it. It's not tech for tech's sake. It's a matter of where's the opportunity. If you can leverage tech, does it have to be cutting edge tech or not? But it has to be driven by the opportunity.
Yeah,
So-
you can't use the same criteria
Yeah,
that you use to
it's
evaluate.
not how cool the tech is. It's a matter of are you solving a problem? And
Yeah.
there's a ton of problems to be solved, so a ton of money to be made.
Makes sense. Yes, here.
The interesting thing about, from Nigerian perspective is it's a lot of foreign direct investment that goes in, and of course there's that thing from the investor that they want to exit at a particular point in time. But to build up on what the gentleman in the back said, in your experience, have you seen a situation where, here in America, you see startups, growing in schools, at universities, and understanding the grassroots, potential of their market or of their product, and going into the major market to monetize their product. Do you see that in Africa, where you do business, and also we talk about venture capitalists in Silicon Valley trying to understand opportunities in Africa, but in those countries like Nigeria, Ghana, do you see venture capitalists growing and seeing those opportunities and want to invest in those?
I have a pretty pessimistic view of things sometimes. But the guys in the Bay are not looking at Africa as, let me put $1 here and trying to expand it outside of Africa. I just don't think. It's for learning, maybe it's interesting. Okay, we can learn a thing or two, but I don't think they're looking to put money into Africa to exit, to take that venture. And for the most part, it's mostly experimental. And there's no VC money in Africa. There's none. You're not going to raise any money from anybody in Africa simply because they don't have the patience. There's no patient capital in Africa. So I don't think in terms of VC-funded company going big with local VC money, that's never going to happen. I mean, not in our lifetime.
As I said, I think, historically, you might get some money from family members or things like that, but they're just growing up. I didn't know what an angel investor was. I got here and I was like, oh, this is nice. Someone just writes you a check because you have a cool PowerPoint, and sounds pretty cool. But in a sense, it brings a different kind of discipline, because to build a business, you have to build a viable business one way or another. You have to manage your cash flows. You have to figure out different ways to make it work. I think there's still ways to get money. What I'm saying is that if you have a good business, there will be a way globally to get money into your business, because somebody's going to see the opportunity and put money in. But the Silicon Valley VCs, their model is very narrow. They work backwards from, I have this level of funding, I need an exit of at least, make it up 500 million or a billion, therefore I want a 10x return, therefore this, therefore that. So they see great businesses all the time and turn them down because that business does not fit their model. So what I'm saying is, if you want to do a successful business in Africa, there's so many opportunities, but it does not necessarily mean that it's going to fit the venture capital, the typical venture capital. Maybe we need a different kind of African venture capital that fits the African model better.
Local, yeah.
But because of lack of established liquidity systems, track record of exits, how are you going to grow this company to a certain level, and then who is going to acquire it, and how many other companies like that have been acquired to give me confidence that you can achieve that, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really fit the typical VC model. But, but as it's savvy investors will still find a way to make money if they see opportunity.
It's harder to really fund ideas. Like I think that the businesses that have already developed some traction on their own are more likely to get some funding, but to get there in the first place, you don't have the infusion of capital.
Yeah, makes sense. Good, good. Other questions? Yeah, please.
So you mentioned that a lot of African economies, a lot of African governments look to large infrastructure projects and mining and oil and gas as solutions to their economy. How can you convince these governments or work with these governments in order to grow the technology sector, to show them that the technology sector can be a viable engine for growth for their economies?
Once again, I'm going to be a little brutally honest. I don't think you can convince a government that's been making money from oil or mining or tourism that's going to change. And I don't think technology today, if it's not homegrown, it's imported. So it's difficult to convince a government. In fact, what they do, for example, in our industry in telecom, they tax the hell out of telecom because they need that to pay, to pay their employees. So they would see things they're used to, oil, gas. Those are the things where most governments see there's money. And when they see a telco, they're trying to get as much, juice out of them in order to stay in power. So it's kind of a reverse.
So let me ask you on this, but what breaks the logjam here? You basically said there's a lot of intrinsic growth in Africa, middle class is growing, you have smartphone penetration rising, you have internet access, you have a bunch of end demand there, yet nobody's willing to fund. Government's not willing to fund, venture investing is not good. What breaks the logjam? Because there's something missing here. If you were to say there's no growth there, then fine, everybody understands it.
I think it's like, countries and economies have evolved in the past when there was nothing called venture capital. So this idea that you need venture capital to evolve an economy, you don't. People have been starting businesses for thousands of years and growing economies. So I don't think that, I think what's going to happen is that, and I think convince is the wrong word. To convince a government, you have to remember that government is a bunch of people with their own incentives. And unfortunately, within Africa, many of those incentives are not aligned with even the success of the country. It's like they're trying to figure out what's best for them, all of those things. So I think the best thing the entrepreneur can do is just go back to 101. Is there demand? And can I provide value to meet this demand? And if I can leverage some support from the government, great. If I could leverage support from the VCs, great. If I can't, I'm going to innovate something else of how to get it done. And as that's happening, if the government starts to see, like technology is a tool, if the government starts to see that tech sector is a major source of revenue, income, whatever for the country, the government will be all about tech, even if their policy was not about tech. But if they start to see all this tech-enabled innovation and success, pulling in money from the outside and driving the economy, then the governments will hang their hat on tech. They're hanging their hat on oil because oil has proven to deliver the goods in the past. But I don't think it's, especially in Africa, I don't think you can rely on, the government will do what it's going to do. But outside of that, as an entrepreneur, you just have to do what you're going to do. And if you're lucky that what the government is doing aligns, then that's a bonus. But I wouldn't build a strategy around what the government is going to do.
Good. Let's take a final question here, and then I'm going to pose one to each of you as a close. Yeah, Craig?
First, I think the three of you have been quite candid, but let me go deeper, because I sit on the board of a company that is, we're the largest mobile phone company in India, and we're the #2 in Africa, Bharti Airtel. And we acquired for $11 billion 6 years ago 17 countries in Africa. We're down to 15. We'll likely go down further. That's public. But what we have found at almost every area of all these countries is not only the lack of infrastructure, hard infrastructure, but human resource. Certain African countries don't have more than 3 or 4 accountants, CPAs. So how do you build a multi-billion-dollar company when you don't have accountants, lawyers, and customer salespeople, all of that. We've learned the hard way. We've turned it around. It's now starting to move up. But it has been a very challenging environment. So I wonder if you could comment. Guy seems to be smiling. I'm sure he's experienced some of this.
Well, first of all, you guys killed the market by coming in and introducing ½ cent a minute, because the market was doing fine, and then when Airtel came,
This is a boomerang comment, by the way.
So yeah, I think that was the first mistake by trying to undercut everybody. That was in Nigeria, and Kenya as well, and then Safaricom kicked you out. So I mean, not yet. But you undercut the market. So you coming in, supposedly the idea was, okay, these telecom companies are making a lot of money, so the government can tax the hell out of them and improve the well-being of everybody. But when you came in, the opposite effect occurred. But in terms of human resources, I mean, that's the story of my life. It's impossible to get talent. So that's an opportunity for you guys. Because frankly speaking, I will pay a super premium to an accountant because my business, and I mean, that's why you have all these expats working at Airtel. Because it's, you guys can get a job like this making 6 figures simply because, and you don't even have to be that good. But that's because the demand is so, the pain is so severe for these guys. I know Christian very well. It's really painful. So that's the problem.
I mean, I think everywhere where there's some friction, there's opportunity. So, in the past, if there was no infrastructure, but the opportunity was big enough, the company that was trying to sell some goods will build railroads or something. Just because they'll go into the transportation business in order to enable whatever they need to do. So maybe companies like that have to go into the education business, to enable, to train people up. Because there's a huge appetite for education. I mean, in Nigeria, which is what I know, parents will sacrifice their last, dollar that they have for the education of their kids. Ironically, in the US, I think Nigerians are the highest educated minority in the United States. So there's all these kind of things. So it's not a lack of interest in education, but maybe it's lack of access, all those other things. So I think maybe that's one way. Another thing that I noticed, which sounds very simple, is just basic project management. There seems to be a big lack of that. Just, you want to get from A to B, follow these 10 steps and get there. But to get people that can just organize that is kind of, there's a challenge there. So I think maybe as in other situations where multinationals find like a dearth of talent, they have to either invest in it or actually, maybe create a venture capital, corporate VC fund that invests in education of the kind of things that the companies need, or full-on education. A lot of people graduate university with a piece of paper, but they don't have the actual skills to work in a multinational company. So what is that gap? It's not exactly executive ed, but it's some kind of additional educational layer. And, you could monetize that as well, because you could make it like payment plan over the course of your career. People will sign up for those kind of things because at the end of it, they're guaranteed almost a job with a great company if they go through that and all of that. So I think, again, one can't rely on the governments or to do certain things. They will do what they will do. I think if you want to go there and you see, like, I have a $10 billion opportunity, then invest 2% of that in education to enable the opportunity and just go forward. That's what I would suggest.
Good. Let me ask one last question before we do a close here. 30 seconds or less from each of you. If you had one piece of advice for all the attendees here, if they're interested in Africa, interested in opportunities, what would that one piece of advice be? Ami, you want to start?
Sure. I think it speaks to something we've talked about a little bit, but it's to really understand the root cause of the problem that you're trying to solve or the challenge that you're trying to approach, not just to come in with a solution that's worked somewhere else. Before you've even developed a solution, talk to people, understand why that's a challenge for them.
Great. Guy?
Well, I would say, so there are opportunities everywhere. In technology, it requires capital. So you may want to think about, technology. We're all excited about technology because we live here. And it's even more exciting there, but there's no money funding technology. I would also say, and just generally speaking, look at opportunities in agriculture, in energy, because they're really, I mean, the continent is booming. We're just here talking about technology, but any industry really, there's some very, very, very large opportunities that you guys should investigate.
Excellent. Don?
Have patience.
Have patience. That was less than 30 seconds.
That's it.
Have patience. Excellent. Good. Omar, you want to do a wrap?
I just want to thank the moderator and the panelists for joining us today, for taking the time out of the day to join us for such an engaging and fascinating conversation. So please join me in thanking them.